I think it's really important for teachers to develop routines and structures where they can listen to each individual child reading aloud. Because even just spending 1 or 2 pages listening to an individual student read aloud, you can learn so much about what they are understanding and misunderstanding about how that printed language works and how you decode and identify the words as you encounter them in text. And then it also gives you that opportunity to ask those quick kind of open-ended prompting questions to see if they're even making sense of what they've just read aloud to you.
I think that the students they will be able to practice more if they could be in a smaller group setting or even in partners. And in a couple of our videos, the teacher wasn't necessarily with a group. They were in partners, and she went around to each group. That way you can pick up on the skills that they were, missing.
They can read to each other.
Yeah, they can read to each other. And
I think you're spot on. It's sometimes you're sitting one-on-one with an individual student, but you can also set up situations where kids are reading in pairs and go around and listen behind them, or even sitting in small groups. And then many times I would sit with my first graders in a small group, and I would sit in the middle and make them all turn outside instead of inside, and they would read on their own, but I could sit in the middle and I could monitor like 6 readers all at once to get a sense of who was making sense of where we were at that point in time around the development of those beginning reading skills. For me as a teacher, learning to take running records and then looking at that information later to make sense of the skills that the student had and maybe some of the new teachings that I needed to make available around particular sound spelling correspondences would come up for me in doing those careful kind of running records. Not every day with every student, but on a very regular basis, so I could see what lessons they were mastering.
Right, and that reminds me of the importance of matching the text to the reader, because you don't want them to make so many errors they get frustrated. So the guide talks about instructional level text, roughly where they won't make more than 10% of the words that they'll misread. But then to provide the kind of prompts and supports to get them to use what you've taught them, sound it out, do you recognize a part of this word to emphasize the word parts and the morphemes. So I think that matching of text is really important, which leads to the fact that you may have different students reading different text, and you need to differentiate instruction by having partner reading or small group work, and sometimes whole group work when you're teaching something where nobody knows this, and this is a skill that you're introducing to everybody.
One of the ways that teachers at my school accommodate that wide variety of reading levels, particularly that you will see in that kindergarten, first grade, and then by the end of second grade it starts to level out a little bit. But those early years, there's such a wide range in reading levels. So our teachers set up individual book bins for each student, and within each, so they know which bin is theirs, and in that bin they've picked books that match where they are in terms of their reading levels. And so when it's time to do that independent practice and that building up of fluency, then teachers know they're interacting with texts that provide just enough challenge without overwhelming the student. And I think if we put students in texts that are always way too challenging, in many respects that's a place where bad habits can be developed and reinforced, because then they don't have the skills they need to be able to read the words. So in terms of alphabetics and the sound spelling correspondences, so they find other ways to try to read or look like they're reading, and that can become the beginning of the development of some really bad habits that don't really develop the student as a reader.
And a bad habit we talked about in the guide was guessing. Students, when they're trying to decode a word or trying to pronounce the whatever it is, they guess. And we try, in the guide we said, if they are really struggling with it, don't have them guess. Just go ahead and tell them the word, and then have them reread the sentence to make sure that they, understand what it's talking about. But yeah, that's a bad habit to guess. And I see that in schools now. And I also see it where not only do they guess at the word, but that no one's there to give them the guidance or the explanation of why that word is different or that's not the correct word that should go there.
Or how to break that word apart and begin to sound it out, either in individual sounds or in chunks based on what we know about sound, spelling, correspondences. But with just a little bit of coaching on individual words now and then, it can pay great dividends with many new encounters, because students will continue to encounter new words as they read.